As many of you know, last February 1st, my mom went to be with the Lord, and she was in the hospital for 1 week, the last week of January, with pneumonia, and she was 92 years old. So, of course, it was very scary and very dangerous, especially at that age. And about halfway through her experience in the hospital, the pneumonia got worse, and we were all at the point where we knew that it could go either way, and we weren't sure if she was going to come home. And I remember driving home that night, extremely anxious, exhausted, and fearful because the possibility of death was staring me right in the face. And to be honest with you, the death of my mother was one of my greatest fears in life because my mother and I were extremely close, and she was certainly the person that I loved the most. And there was death possible and looking me right in the face as I got home. I was so anxious, I was sure I was not going to be able to sleep. And as I sat in my bed, I prayed, and suddenly I experienced tremendous peace. And miraculously, I was able to sleep and to rest that night because the peace was speaking to me and saying, "All is well. Your mother is in my hands. All is well." And I slept like a baby that night. And I know for sure that this peace that surpasses all understanding and guards our hearts and minds in Jesus Christ, was a supernatural peace that I definitely was not giving to myself. And a couple of days later, my brothers and sisters, my mom went to be with the Lord peacefully, surrounded by me, my two brothers, and her two best friends. And as my brother and myself were walking out of the hospital that evening, right before we got to the elevator, there was a scripture in this Catholic hospital that was announced. And I said to my brother, "Stop, listen. And the scripture was Hebrews 4:16, which says, "Let us then with confidence approach the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need." And I said to my brother, wow. I said, remember that. Don't forget that. Hebrews 4:16, don't forget it. And we ended up putting it on my mom's holy card. So this is a scripture that will be with me in a very special way that the Lord brought in the midst of my greatest fear that day. And so my message today on Easter Sunday is the good news of Easter, which is that the tomb we fear the most is empty. The tomb we fear the most is empty. And the tomb represents, of course, physical death, but also much more. The tomb represents sin, fear, evil, darkness, grief and sorrow, and the terror of the unknown. The good news is that we are not to live in fear of any of these because we were baptized into Christ's death and also into his resurrection. This is Romans 6:4. "For you were buried with him by baptism into death, in order that, just as Christ was raised from the dead, we too might walk in newness of life." This is the epistle from St. Paul from last night's Easter Vigil, that we were baptized into his death, and so therefore we are partakers and sharers of his resurrection. And the life of the resurrection speaks to us in our times of trouble, in the midst of our tombs, in the form of peace, the peace that surpasses all understanding, and in the form of faith. This is the life of the resurrection as it comes to us in real time, in practical ways, and in daily life. And in the gospel today, we see Mary of Magdala and Peter and John facing their greatest fear directly before them. the death of the one person they love the most, Jesus, the Son of God. But not only this, they were also facing the even greater fear that death is the end of everything, the end of hope, the end of faith, the end of any meaning that came from everything that Jesus said and did. And in our reading from Colossians today, we hear, if you have been raised with Christ, seek what is above. Think of what is above, not what is on the earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. In the gospel, we see Mary and Peter and John show us how to seek what is above. For we are told that Mary went to the tomb early in the morning while it was still dark. And so she got up early, despite the darkness in her life, despite the pain, despite the grief, the sorrow, and the fear. And what did she see? She saw the first sign of hope. The stone was removed from the tomb, and the tomb was empty. She did not understand it in real time. She went and told the disciples, and the disciples went to the tomb to see for themselves. They also got up out of bed, probably in the twilight, when it was still dark, when they were in pain, when they were at a loss for hope, when their faith was being challenged. Not only did they go to the tomb, but they ran to the tomb. They ran to face their greatest fear. And when Peter and John entered the tomb, they saw immediately that it was empty. And by God's grace, they believed. My brothers and sisters, peace and faith is the life of the resurrection every day. Not just on Easter, but every day. And so we're invited to seek what is above and not what is below. Because if we seek what is below, there truly is no hope, and there certainly is no faith, and there is no peace in the midst of our greatest fears and tombs. And so Easter invites us to seek what is above by approaching the throne of God's grace in the midst of our fears and darkness. For when we seek Jesus above all things and in all circumstances, we will know that the tomb is empty, and we will rise with Christ through faith and the peace that surpasses all understanding.